The English landscape binds its secrets tightly, but within its soil can be found the imprint of events both great and small. There are few clues, but here in Yorkshire, 500 years ago, is said to have taken place Britain's bloodiest battle. On Palm Sunday 1461, up to 60,000 men gathered in the fields outside the village of Towton near York. By the day's end, history records, 28,000 lay dead or dying. The conflict in which they perished was a turning point in the Wars of the Roses. Its outcome determined the future of the kingdom. But their final battle and their final moments have been almost forgotten until now. Five centuries of myth and legend lie between us and the truth of the Battle of Towton. Forensic science was about to cut through them. At Towton Hall in 1996, builders were digging foundations for an extension. Just beneath the surface, they found human remains. As the bones came to light, archaeologists called to the site realized what they'd found: a mass grave, and the way in which those inside it had died had been brutal.
I think a lot of people have a very romantic view of medieval warfare, and the injuries at Towton really bring these people to life and show what they must have undergone. And it shows a picture that wasn't romantic at all. It shows a picture of a very horrific death.
In death, the Towton soldiers were about to yield remarkable information. For the international team of archaeologists of Bradford University, they would disclose the savage reality of hand-to-hand fighting, demolish the myth of chivalry, and conjure images of a dreadful slaughter. First, the men in the grave had to be exhumed. The pit was a tangled mass of bones, and the archaeologists had little time to work. But using infrared surveying equipment, they were able to record the exact position of each bone to within 1 millimeter.
We survey 16 points on the body, one on the centre of the skull, one on each shoulder, one on each elbow, one on each wrist, 3 down the spine, 3 down each leg, which means the 16 points can be used to build up a reconstruction of the skeleton once we've actually excavated it.
Tim Sutherland's survey produced a 3-dimensional image of the grave and the separate skeletons layered within it. There were 37 bodies, packed tightly together where they'd been buried on that snow-driven March day 500 years before.
One has to imagine that this was a very fierce battle, that as many people as possible had to be buried in as short a time as possible under very unfavorable conditions. And so all the soldiers were almost packed like sardines in a tin. They were closely packed in this grave. Little spaces were used by fitting people in where they could, and there was a very, very tight layering.
As the skeletons were unearthed, the work began. Bone analysis revealed them to have been men and boys aged between 16 and 50. Carbon dating confirmed that they'd died around the time of the battle. They'd been stripped naked, the cause of death evident in their massive head wounds.
At first we couldn't quite believe the extent of the injuries which some of these people had suffered. One of the individuals had up to 13 skull injuries, and it seemed almost that unhuman or unnatural for anybody to be hacked to death in such a way.
For the archaeologists, the questions were equally clear. Who were the men in the Towton grave pit? How exactly had they come to die there? When they died, England had been in turmoil for 6 years. The Wars of the Roses were a vicious struggle for the crown, the white and red roses representing the rival dynasties of York and Lancaster. It wasn't the simple fight we imagine between Yorkshire and Lancashire. The war split England between north and south. The Red Rose Lancastrians were mostly men of the north and included Scots. The White Rose Yorkists found their support mostly in southern England and Wales. But as in any civil war, there were no clean battle lines. The country was torn into a ragged patchwork of conflicting loyalties. The reigning king, Henry VI, was a Lancastrian, a pious man but with a shaky grip on the throne. For the followers of his rival, young Edward, Earl of March, the son of York was rising. Edward had led the Yorkists for just 12 weeks following the slaying of his father, Richard, and his brother, Edmund, by Henry's men. Now at Towton, he wanted revenge and to have the crown for himself.
Young, 18-year-old Edward has lost his father, he's lost his 17-year-old brother. Is he going to arrive at the Battle of Towton 3 months later, full of the milk of human kindness, with a forgiving nature? No. What he's out for is vengeance. He wants the murderers of his family. I think the scene is set for a particularly brutal and vicious conflict.
In the turmoil of civil war, formal records disappear. Evidence for the ferocity of the fighting at Towton relies on chronicles and folk memory. We're told the Lancastrians had the advantage in numbers. They were on the field first and took advantage of high ground to make a strong, well-defended position.
What's interesting about a battlefield such as Towton is that, contrary to most ideas about medieval generalship, it's actually very well chosen. The Lancastrian right flank is well protected by this steep drop here. So in actual fact, the general had made every attempt to protect his position.
You've got the Yorkists advancing onto the plateau early morning and laying out from this position here along the fields directly over to Castle Hill Wood, which is over on that flank there. The Lancastrians were spreading the fields along the edge of that boundary there. So in effect it's a shallow valley and both armies lined up at either side.
The Yorkists had fewer troops, but one major advantage: the weather. They had the wind behind them, and as dawn broke, it was blowing a blizzard straight into the faces of the Lancastrians. Under the snow's cover, Yorkist archers are said to have advanced unseen and shot repeated flights of arrows into the ranks massed against them. The Lancastrians took heavy casualties and had no choice but to advance and engage the Yorkists hand to hand. The bitter fighting that followed reputedly lasted 10 hours. The outcome decided only by the arrival of Yorkist reinforcements. As the Lancastrians fled, they were cut down. The blood of the 28,000 killed in the battle is said to have made the rivers run red for days. So much for the Towton story. But what facts could the grave pit offer the archaeologists? The skeletons were a mix of body types, some of them very robust. They ranged in height from as little as 5'2" to just over 6 feet tall. They were fighting men, but the scientists couldn't even tell whose side they'd been on.
I think we probably have individuals from almost every walk of medieval life. I can say that because of the general stature of the individuals, and that suggests they're being drawn from a whole host of lives. There are some individuals bearing previous injuries, aspects of a very strenuous lifestyle, and others different from any other medieval population.
Because the archaeologists had been able to recover whole skeletons, they could begin to work out the physique of individual bodies. Would this give a clue about the part the men had played in the battle?
In this case, it was very important that we had complete individuals, because it gave us a fuller picture of what this person went through. Because we had the full skeleton in each case, or almost each case, we could work out that some of them were very strongly developed and they might have had dietary deficiencies. But we had quite a lot of individuals with the left arm being further developed than the right arm, and that might indicate that they were practicing archery.
If the skeletons in the Towton grave include archers, it's significant. On any medieval battlefield, only 10% were knights in armour. The rest were foot soldiers, mostly conscripts. But in English armies, the archers were the backbone of this infantry. The longbow was their weapon of mass destruction. Practice with the bow was enforced by law in England and had produced a breed of men with formidable killing power.
If there is one glory of English arms in the late Middle Ages, it is the bowman. Edward I had used large numbers of archers in the late 13th century, and of course by the time of Edward III in the mid-14th century, these archers are going abroad. There was plenty to be gained if you were campaigning in France. Great victories like Agincourt would make an archer a rich man.
In the course of the 100 Years' War with France, English archers became the most feared killing machine of the age. The archers at Towton were the sons and grandsons of the generation that fought at Agincourt. They'd have learnt their skills in just the same way.
They'd have started at a young age. I mean, one, it was the law, but I think it'd have been peer pressure. They'd see the fathers using the bow and want to have a go at it themselves. I mean, the power of the longbow, it was a great leveller. It didn't matter whether you were a king, duke, knight, whatever. You could still be shot and killed at long range by just a simple man of the land.
But the glories of the 100 Years' War were long gone. Henry VI's reign had seen the loss of almost all England's possessions abroad. In the snows at Towton, the English bowmen were facing not the French, but their own kind. They knew what they could expect.
When they closed for battle, archer against archer, I think the archers of one side or the other, they'd want to be the first to get off the first flight of arrows. Quite possibly the first flight of the Yorkist arrows could have disabled 8, 9, 10,000 people, killed and disabled them. Then it had been an out-and-out archery battle that perhaps only lasted 10 minutes, but the death toll and the casualties would have been frightening.
The suggestion that there might be archers in the grave pit comes from unusual bone development in some of the skeletons. Back and arm bones seem to have been under particular stress in life. The question for the Bradford team was whether this could have been caused by pulling the longbow.
I think one of the most commonly asked questions is, are these guys archers? And although I can't say that